July 17th was International Justice Day, and it was also the 8th anniversary of the founding of the International Criminal Court, or ICC. The ICC has had a bit of a shaky start, and to date has been dealing with 5 cases, all from African countries. This has led to some accusing it of having an anti-African bias. An interesting fact is that the ICC hasn't been fully endorsed by countries like Russia, China, India and the USA, which has led to a feeling that it can't be taken seriously. Join me, Vuiswang and an informed panel as we discuss the ICC prosecution of African leaders. Africa Today asks, does the ICC have an anti-African bias?
Chad has branded the International Criminal Court anti-African and biased towards the continent. This follows the country's refusal to carry out an arrest warrant for Sudanese President Omar al-Bashir, who the ICC accuses of war crimes and genocide. President Bashir was in Chad, a signatory of the ICC, for a summit between leaders of the community of Sahel-Saharan states. As a member of the ICC, Chad was legally obliged to arrest Mr. al-Bashir and anyone the ICC has issued an arrest warrant for. But the country sees the ICC's interference in Africa as unfair and unjustified. The arrest warrant over a sitting president has always been opposed by the African Union and the Arab League. The African Union has urged its members not to arrest the Sudanese president. The ICC, in response to this accusation by Chad, has labeled the continent as the worst place for crimes. Africa Today now finds out why the ICC has so far been selective and mostly targeted African leaders.
Hello and welcome to Africa Today with me, Vuiswang Obongwana. As you've just heard in that report from Kofi Asamoah, the latest in a line of controversies facing the ICC is Chad's refusal to arrest Sudanese President Omar al-Bashir. Omar al-Bashir's arrest warrant was granted on the basis that the policy of Rome Treaty, which gave birth to the ICC 12 years ago, is to go for the most serious crimes and to go against the people highest in military or civilian control who appear to be responsible for them. These are, of course, war crimes calling out for investigation in many countries. But unfortunately, some of these crimes are being committed in countries which the International Criminal Court simply doesn't have any jurisdiction over. A familiar critique now is that the court is a symbol of Western legal colonialism. Africans are being brought to Europe to face foreign judges and lawyers. But is this a fair criticism? Here with me to answer that question are Mohamed Eltom, who's the Chargé d'Affaires at the Sudanese Embassy here in London, Alice Ukoko, the founder and CEO of Women of Africa, and on the phone we're delighted to welcome from Brussels, Geraldine Mattioli-Zeltner, Advocacy Director of the International Justice Programme for Human Rights Watch. Thank you all for joining us. If I could start with you, Alice. Is it a fair criticism to say that the ICC has an inherently anti-African bias?
It is not at all. It is not a fair criticism. It is desirable that those who are committing crime against human beings, regardless of whether they are Africans or not, should be brought to justice.
But the people facing trial or accusations are all African.
Yes, because the most abused people in this planet are Africans, and it's Africans themselves that are actually abusing their own people. And therefore, the ICC, you will say, is coming to the aid of African women and children who are completely helpless, and they are the victims of what their leaders, so-called leaders, are actually doing to them. The impoverishment, the killings that are going on, the conflict, you may argue, that is being fueled by weapons that are brought in by other people. But at the same time, it is the Africans themselves who are supposed to be protecting their own people that are actually killing them.
Well, let's go to another African who would probably have a different point of view. I mean, Omar al-Bashir is taking all the headlines with regard to resisting the ICC's attempt to bring him to trial. I mean, what is your point of view, Mohamed, in answer to the question that the ICC has an anti-African bias?
Yes, it does, of course. We believe that the ICC is very selective in the cases that it has been tackling. And of course, the cases which the prosecutor has pursued so far confirms this statement. All the cases now the ICC is looking are African cases. Mm-hmm. And where at the same time the world around us is full of hotspots where conflicts are taking place, crimes are being committed against civilians, atrocities are being committed, but actually the ICC is just overlooking these places.
Well, let me bring Geraldine in
of
here.
Of course, I don't want, before that, if you would allow me,
sure.
Of course, we don't believe, of course, this should in any way mean that justice should not be brought to Africans or to African people. On the contrary, we believe our stand today against the ICC is because we believe that justice should be done to Africa. And the way it is being pursued by the ICC will just do the opposite.
Okay,
yeah.
Well, we're going to go into more details for you to explain why you think that more specifically. Sure. But if I could bring you in, Geraldine, you've probably heard this accusation many times. What is human rights' point of view with regard to the ICC being perceived as having an anti-African bias?
Yes, well, I think something that's important to start with is to insist about how justified the ICC action is in all places where it's investigating crimes. I think, as Alice pointed out, nobody can dispute the fact that atrocities of an amazing scale have taken place in all situations where the ICC is currently active, be it Uganda, Congo, the Central African Republic, Darfur. So the action of the ICC bringing to justice to victims is the only hope these victims have of seeing justice. They've never seen justice so far. So I would like to start with that. Now, at the same time, I hear what Mohammed said. There are very serious crimes happening in Iraq. There are serious crimes happening in Chechnya. There are serious crimes happening in Sri Lanka. How come the court is not doing anything in these places? On that front, I think it's important to remember that the ICC does not have jurisdiction in any of these places because none of the countries involved have ratified its statute, and the Security Council of the United Nations has not transferred these cases to the court, contrary to what it did in Sudan, because we know Sudan is not a party, but the Security Council transferred the cases. So the situation we have is indeed a situation of inequity, and we at Human Rights Watch want to fight this. It is indeed not fair that justice for the victims in Gaza or in Iraq or in Chechnya is not forthcoming. Okay. But the way we see this is it's not the fault of the ICC. It's a reflection of power relationships in the world, and powerfuls can still escape justice, and that's unfortunate, and all of us should fight that to have more justice, not less justice.
Okay, and if I could bring you back in, Mohammed, to finish your point being more expansive about why you think it is being selectively anti-African. Geraldine has just explained there that its hands are tied with regard to being able to prosecute other people who others would argue also are committing genocide.
And this very point, confirms that the ICC is not the right vehicle through which justice can be achieved in Africa. Because, to argue that the other places where now there are conflicts and crimes committed, these countries are not members to the ICC and to the Rome Statute. Actually, this applies as well to Sudan. But the difference here is that the superpowers which are controlling the United Nations Security Council, which the Rome Statute gives the right to refer the cases to the ICC, is being controlled by the superpowers, the United Nations Security Council. And of course, we will expect that these countries will not refer any cases that involving any kind of responsibility against them or accusations against them, will not refer them to the ICC. This is to start with. The second is that according to Vienna Convention of Treaties of 1969, the decisions and resolutions of any international organizations is binding to those who are members to that organization. But to try to impose resolutions or decisions of an international organization on countries that are not members, and to African countries that are not members of this organization is kind of selectivity and double standards, and breach of international law as well.
Well, talking about the seeking of international justice, we'll come back to you after we've read our emails, Alice, to talk about how those people you feel so passionately about, particularly women in Africa and children, can get some kind of justice now, while the long drawn-out process of seeking international justice has yet to be resolved properly. But as we've mentioned, the ICC's determination to bring al-Bashir to court has taken another turn, and that happened on July the 12th. We'll be hearing about that in a few moments, but it's also worth noting that at the recent African Union summit in Kampala, the ICC didn't get much in the way of respect, with many countries supporting Chad's decision to ignore the warrant against al-Bashir. But before we move on to discuss the wider implications of this apparently unified African stance against the ICC, it's time to hear what you've been saying via your emails, texts and Facebook comments. And I'm going to start by reading an email from Solomon, who's living in Uganda. Solomon says, "Let Mr. Katungi be clear about this. Before the NRM, his party, came to power, there was no cross-border aggression until President Museveni's government took power in Uganda by force. That is where NRM regime started supporting different armed groups around sister countries." Of course, Uganda is very much in the news. Looking into our Facebook page, we had an interesting comment from Moses, based here in London. Moses says that Kenya has to revisit her history because as a state, Kenya was built on a very colonial foundation. Today, 70% of Kenyan land is still owned by foreigners. No wonder the same people are trying to intervene in the draft constitution to keep their lot. I guess justice has to prevail because land in Kenya must belong to Kenyans and not foreigners. Very passionate feeling there about foreign interest in Kenya's constitution from Moses. Moving on to texts, we have some words from Peter in Nigeria. Peter is making a general comment about African leaders, and he says that our leaders have failed us, with the exception of Mandela. There should be a revolution on the continent by the young progressives. I believe our continent would change for the better. Thanks. From Kwesi in London, he says the only solution to the numerous problems of Africa is unification. What at all is preventing Africa from becoming one? Well, we could spend hours discussing that, and we have many times on Africa Today. And we have another comment by text from Kelue in Nigeria. Kelue says, a foreign government has no business in Congo. If it is so for security, they should beef up their border. There are just murderers and greedy for Congo's wealth. Some very strong feelings. If that prompted you to want to make a comment back, please let us know. Our Facebook page is right there, Africa Today, Press TV London, and of course you can email or text us. But as you heard from Kalua's text from Nigeria, he brought up the thorny issue of foreign government interference in the Congo. Many African countries opposing the ICC feel that it represents those very outside interests. And there have been movements to give the African Court of Justice some jurisdiction over international crimes. How will this fit with the jurisdiction of the ICC? And indeed, is it a desirable thing? Before we get to discussing that question, here's Kofi Asamoah with the latest twist in the tale concerning al-Bashir and the ICC.
The ICC issued an arrest warrant for President Omar al-Bashir in March 2009, accusing him of war crimes and crimes against humanity over the Darfur crisis. On 12th of July this year, a second warrant was issued on charges to include alleged genocide-related campaigns targeting the Fur, Masalit and Zagwa ethnic groups in the region.
Now 10 judges debated and the court issued an arrest warrant for genocide. And that is changing because first Bashir is denying the crimes, at the same time is threatening to commit new crimes in Darfur and in South Sudan. So to protect himself, he threatened to commit new crimes. And now we say it's genocide.
His visit to Chad is the first to an ICC member country from when his arrest warrant was issued. Since the ICC's inception in 2002, all of its ongoing cases are in Africa. Its mandate is to prosecute those who commit war crimes, crimes against humanity, and genocide. Many Africans have accused it of targeting only Africans and ignoring similar crimes committed by former leaders of America and Britain, George W. Bush and Tony Blair respectively, over the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. This leads many Africans to question the ICC's legitimacy and genuineness.
Well, as you could hear, that report from Kofi Asamoah really crystallized what's at the heart of the matter. As I promised before the break, Alice, I did promise to come to you. You've heard all the arguments and the concerns about the state of the fledgling ICC as it exists. Now, how would you like to see a scenario where the group you work with, the most vulnerable, can be protected in the interim period? Do you think we should soldier on with the ICC in its current condition? Or can you see, as we mentioned earlier, the African Court of Justice having more of an influence?
African Court of Justice. What we know is that there is no law in Africa. There is no respect for human beings in Africa. There is no respect for the resources that belong to the people in Africa. There is no respect for human dignity in Africa. There is no respect for even God in Africa. We profess God. We profess that we represent the African tradition. But we also know that the African tradition is not a violent tradition. People who are abusing Africans are the ones that are citing and hiding behind African tradition. And really, with the people we work with, Africans are being impoverished by Africans themselves. Africans' resources are being taken out of Africa to the same people we are accusing of imperialism. A lot of our wealth are being taken out and therefore siphoning our wealth into Western lands and impoverishing our people. The arms that we question that are not manufactured in Africa are the same arms that are being taken into Africa to drive African women and children to and fro in their own continent.
But in the perpetual quest for justice, do you feel the ICC, can actually soldier on, Alice? We will
appeal on behalf of African women and children that the ICC should soldier on and in fact open out the jurisdiction to take on crimes that have been committed against women and children in places like Gaza, in places like Sri Lanka, in places like Iraq, and in places like Iran. We live in a global world and we live in the 21st century. We can no longer hide behind tradition in the cause of abusing humanity in our own land. Humanity abuse of our own people should stop, and it should stop now. Well, if African governments are not able to protect the rights of fellow Africans, Africa does not belong to these leaders alone. It belongs to every African, and we must move on.
I understand the passion that you feel, Alice. If I could bring you in, Geraldine, you heard Alice there speaking, just seeking justice now, not waiting for a future day. How do you feel about the idea that was mooted earlier on about an African form of jurisdiction to deal with African-centered problems? Can the ICC work in tune with that on some level?
Well, I think in theory you may say more justice can only be good, right? So why not have more instruments to do justice? But the reality is that only 2 African states have ratified so far the Statute of the African Court of Justice. So what I worry about is that this is just a delaying tactic, using this very strong African feeling that some may have, but just to not have justice, because by the time you'll have the ratifications, you'll have the resources, you'll have the staff to set up this court, we're down to waiting another 10, 15 years before anything happens. While at this point in time, without waiting, we have 30 African states parties to the ICC. This is the biggest regional group. Africa is the most committed to the International Criminal Court. And if we are committed to justice, I think it is very important that all together we continue supporting the action of the court and very important that African state parties dissociate themselves from the decision you mentioned a moment ago that was adopted at the African Union, and say that they will respect their obligations vis-à-vis the ICC, and they will arrest President Bashir if he comes on their territory, like they're requested to do by the arrest warrant.
Well, if I could bring Mohammed in here, obviously you totally disagree with that, but what seems to be coming out of this discussion is that Africans seem incapable of bringing justice to their own people.
Actually, it is very regrettable, actually, to hear some Africans themselves demonizing Africa and Africans by saying that there is no law in Africa and that we need foreign interference to have justice in Africa and to have the rule of law by foreigners. And these are the same foreigners who have created, actually, the current hotspots in Africa by creating the reasons of conflicts. And creating
but
this
Alice is
misery.
not one of those people, is she?
I'm not mentioning. I'm referring. It's a general statement, because we believe that the Africans now are, like Geraldine has said, the biggest community which joined the ICC were African countries, and that shows how committed they are to justice. But they have discovered that this is not about justice. And their collective stand now and position as regards the arrest warrant issued by the ICC against President al-Bashir shows that these countries now have become convinced that it is not about justice. It is the double standards and selectivity of the ICC. And
so, can I just interrupt you there? Would you be more amenable to the ICC if other non-African or a more diverse range of people were accused other than what exists now?
I mean, if I may finish just what I mean, the Africans, when they joined the ICC, they believed in the noble objectives of having justice through this kind of international instrument. But if you could, for example, recall some of the positions of the superpowers which are controlling the world now.
Yes.
I will refer to the United States in particular. Yeah. What the United States said about after the ICC started to take shape, the United States refused to join the ICC,
yes,
citing very strong reasons. The first reason cited by the United States was the decisions taken by the ICC are politically motivated. The prosecutor, the office of the prosecutor, doesn't have any accountability whatsoever. No, any other institution that will hold the prosecutor accountable. And this is not acceptable in the field of justice. And the third reason the United States has given is that the interference of the ICC in the current conflicts will undermine the role of the United Nations Security Council.
Okay, lots of contradictions there. Because time is running short, I do have to move on. You didn't answer the question, with all due respect, about whether you'd be more amenable to it if there was a more diverse range. And in looking to the future, in literally the last minute that we have, Alice, yes, do you think the ICC will evolve to kind of deal with the concerns that Mohammed has as it grows, as the international pressure for justice grows, as the global nature of who we are becomes more real?
Well, I do wish and I want to appeal to all African governments who care very much for the African way they feel, that they should start to respect the rights of their people, so that outsiders who they don't want to intervene should come in. But as long as the International Criminal Court stands and is to prosecute people who are perceived to have committed genocide against their own people, as long as they are there to do that, they will continue to do that. And we as African women and children and the future that we look to see, we persuade that, in fact, more institutions like this should come out and begin to, otherwise we have no hope. In a situation where we are running away from our own countries, we are running away from our own governments that are killing us and driving us, carrying meager things on our head, mattresses on our head, marching to nowhere, in a continent where election is conducted, as in Kenya, where you lose, then you say you are not going, you swear yourself in. That cannot happen in modern day countries. Therefore, Africans deserve the right to be treated as human beings, not as some kind of property where...
Understood.
Yes.
Your call for justice is well heard. Talking of which, final few seconds to you, Geraldine, in a kind of wrap-up mode. How do you see in the next 5, 10 years or so the ICC evolving? Your best case scenario?
Well, I think we'll look to the court very closely. I think it will be very important to have trials being closed up successfully. We'll look to states to implement the decisions of the ICC and implement this arrest warrant so that more people are brought before the ICC. And on that front, I would like to say, for us, justice for serious crimes is essential to deter the commission of these crimes in the future. Justice is our hope to avoid future crimes.
Okay.
But to achieve that, we need to be very
Thank you, Geraldine.
firm.
I'm sorry I have to cut you off there on that hopeful note. And that's it. Thanks to all of you who've been sending comments to us. Please email africa@presstv.co.uk. Let us know what you think the solution is for getting international justice. Or if you prefer, text +44 78 0000 8086. Those messages will be charged at local rates. Big thanks to today's guests. They were Mohamed Eltham, Alice Ukoko, and from Brussels, Geraldine Mattioli-Zeltner. Thank you for watching. I'm Vuiswang Ngobongwana. Join Henry Bonsu next week on Africa Today, and from the rest of the team, it's goodbye.